Am I the asshole for not letting my psychopath little sister see my dog? For context, I, 25F, recently moved out of my parents' house after a tumultuous upbringing that left me emotionally scarred. My younger sister, 13F, has always been the center of my parents' attention, and over the years, she has exhibited behaviors that have deeply disturbed me and others around her. It started small. She would pull the wings off flies and laugh as they struggled. But as she grew older, her actions became more sinister. She killed our family's pets, one after the other. First, it was our cat, Missy, who mysteriously disappeared when my sister was 5. My parents told me she ran away, but I knew better. Then, a year later, our parakeet, Blue, was found lifeless at the bottom of its cage, its neck twisted in a way that couldn't have been an accident. My mom insisted it was a tragic mishap, but my dad and I exchanged glances that said everything. We both knew my sister had done it, but my mom was always quick to defend her, saying, "She's just a child, she doesn't know any better." As time went on, my sister's behavior only escalated. My dad wanted to punish her, to get her help, but my mom was adamant that it was just a phase. She even enrolled my sister in therapy once, but when the therapist suggested that my sister might have serious issues, my mom pulled her out and refused to talk about it again. My dad, worn down by my mom's relentless defense of my sister, eventually gave up trying to intervene. He buried himself in work and left the day-to-day parenting to my mom, who continued to coddle my sister, ignoring the increasingly obvious signs that something was very wrong. A year ago, I finally got my own place and decided it was time to get a pet of my own. I adopted a golden retriever rescue dog named Arlo. He was about 5 years old and had been through a lot, but he was the sweetest dog I'd ever met. Arlo became my best friend, my confidant, and the one thing that kept me going when everything else felt too overwhelming. I've never been the type to have a large friend group, so taking Arlo out for walks every day was what got me out of bed every morning. We explored parks, hiked trails, and even visited the dog-friendly beaches a few hours away. Arlo loved the water, and watching him splash around with pure joy made all the stress of my life melt away, if only for a little while. One day, after a particularly stressful day at work, I decided to visit my parents. I hadn't been there in a while, partly because I wanted to avoid the tension that always seemed to follow my sister around. But that day, I felt like I should go, if only to check in. I brought Arlo with me, thinking it would be nice to show him off. My parents had never met him before, and I thought maybe introducing him might bridge the growing gap between us. When I arrived, something felt off immediately. The house was eerily quiet, which was unusual because my sister was always making noise, whether it was her blasting music or her animated conversations with my mom. I didn't hear Arlo's distinctive bark either, which he usually gave when he was excited or curious. My heart started to race as I called out for my parents, but there was no answer. I quickly made my way to the backyard, where I found my dad sitting on the porch, staring off into the distance. He looked older, more worn out than I had ever seen him before. When he saw me, he just shook his head and pointed toward the house. I ran inside, calling for Arlo, and that's when I heard it, a low, painful whine coming from my old bedroom. I rushed to the door and pushed it open, and what I saw nearly made me collapse. Arlo was lying on the floor, shaking and whining in agony. His back was twisted at an unnatural angle, and his eyes were filled with pain and fear. My sister was sitting on my bed, a look of pure indifference on her face. She didn't even try to hide what she had done. "I wanted to play with him," she said, as if that justified everything. But he didn't want to play, so I made him. My mind went blank with rage. I screamed at her, demanded to know what the hell she was thinking, but she just shrugged, like it didn't matter. I scooped Arlo up as gently as I could and rushed him to the vet, but deep down, I knew it was too late. His injuries were too severe, and the vet confirmed my worst fears. There was nothing they could do. I held Arlo as they put him to sleep, tears streaming down my face. My best friend was gone, and it was all because of her. We buried Arlo in the backyard that same evening. My dad was silent throughout the entire ordeal, but I could see the pain in his eyes. My mom, on the other hand, continued to defend my sister, saying things like, "She didn't mean it," and "She's just a kid, let her do what she wants." I wanted to scream at her, to make her see the monster she was enabling, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. She was too deep in denial, too committed to protecting the illusion of a perfect family. I didn't speak to my family for weeks after that. I couldn't bear to be around them, especially my sister. But then, a few days ago, my maternal aunt, who has always been the voice of reason in our family, gifted me a Labrador puppy. She knew how much Arlo had meant to me and wanted to give me something to help fill the void he left behind. I named the puppy Buzz, and he quickly became a source of joy in my life. I was determined to keep him safe, no matter what. I posted a story on Instagram, sharing my excitement about Buzz, but it wasn't long before my family saw it. My mom started texting me non-stop, insisting that my sister wanted to meet the new puppy. I told her in no uncertain terms that my sister would never come near Buzz, but my mom wouldn't take no for an answer. She kept pushing, saying that I was being unfair, that my sister just wanted to see him. I knew better than to give in, so I blocked her number. The next morning, I woke up to Buzz barking frantically at my face. It was unusual for him to be so alarmed, so I quickly got up to check what was going on. To my horror, I found my mom and sister outside my apartment, trying to break in. My mom had taken my sister out of school early, just so she could see Buzz. When I refused to open the door, my sister, in a fit of rage, grabbed her school lunchbox and started banging on my window, almost shattering it. My mom just stood there, watching, not saying a word. It was as if she was silently condoning my sister's behavior, as she always had. Terrified, I grabbed my phone and called the police. It was the only way to get them to leave. My hands were shaking as I tried to comfort Buzz, who was cowering in fear. I had never felt so violated in my own home. This was the final straw. I couldn't live like this anymore. I started looking into legal options, and a few days later, I filed a restraining order against both my mom and sister. It was a difficult decision, but I knew it was the only way to protect myself and Buzz. The process was grueling, having to relive everything that had happened, putting it all on paper for the court. But I knew it was necessary. The judge granted the order, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of relief. However, the relief was short-lived. Shortly after the restraining order was granted, I received a call from Child Protective Services. My dad had reported my mom, concerned that her enabling behavior was putting my sister at risk of becoming a full-blown psychopath. CPS wanted to interview me about my sister's past behavior and my mom's refusal to acknowledge the severity of the situation. It was an agonizing conversation. I had to recount every disturbing incident, every pet that had died, every time my mom had defended my sister instead of getting her help. By the end of the call, I was emotionally drained, but I knew it was the right thing to do. A few days later, I received a letter from CPS informing me that my sister had been placed in a special facility for children with severe behavioral issues. My mom, on the other hand, had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Apparently, the reality of the situation had finally caught up with her, and she had suffered a complete mental breakdown. My dad, unable to care for both my sister and my mom, had made the difficult decision to have her committed. The news left me feeling conflicted. On one hand, I was relieved that my sister was finally getting the help she so desperately needed, but on the other hand, I couldn't shake the guilt I felt for reporting my mom. Even though she had enabled my sister's behavior, she was still my mom, and seeing her like this was heartbreaking. In the midst of all this chaos, I was also dealing with my own struggles. I had been diagnosed with PTSD as a result of everything that had happened with Arlo and my sister, and I was working with a therapist to process the trauma. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I felt like I was barely holding on, but I had Buzz, and he gave me a reason to keep going. His unconditional love and loyalty were a constant source of comfort, and I knew I had to keep fighting for him. As the weeks went by, I began to realize that I needed to make a fresh start. My therapist encouraged me to consider moving to a new city, away from all the memories and the constant fear of my family finding me. It was a terrifying thought, but the more I considered it, the more it made sense. I began looking for apartments in a different state, somewhere far enough away that I could truly start over. Before I left, I decided to visit my mom in the psychiatric hospital. I wasn't sure what I hoped to accomplish by going, but I felt like I needed to see her one last time before I left. When I walked into her room, I was struck by how much she had changed. She looked small and fragile, a far cry from the strong, determined woman I had known growing up. She didn't recognize me at first, her eyes vacant and distant. She mumbled incoherently about needing to protect her little girl, and I realized that even now, she was still trapped in her delusions. I didn't stay long. There was nothing more to say. As I left the hospital, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. My mom was gone, at least the mom I had known. There was no going back now. A few days later, I packed up my things and left town with Buzz by my side. As we drove away, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. I found a small, cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood a few states away. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine, and it was far away from everything that had happened. In my new town, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, helping other rescued dogs like Arlo find loving homes. It was a small way to honor his memory, and it brought me a sense of peace. I also made a few friends, something I hadn't been able to do in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of a community, like I belonged somewhere. One day, out of the blue, I received a letter from my dad. He apologized for everything that had happened and told me that my sister was making progress in her treatment. He said that he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again, but he hoped that one day we could rebuild our relationship. I read the letter several times, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to try and salvage what was left of our family. But another part of me knew that I needed more time to heal before I could even consider that. I wrote him back, thanking him for the update and letting him know that I was doing okay. I didn't make any promises about the future, but I left the door open for the possibility of reconnecting someday. For now, though, I needed to focus on myself and my own healing. As time went on, I continued to work on myself, both in therapy and in my daily life. I started taking classes online, working toward a degree in animal behavior. It was something I had always been interested in, but I had never had the time or energy to pursue it. Now, with the space and distance from my past, I felt like I could finally focus on my own goals and dreams. Buzz continued to be my constant companion, and we developed a routine that brought me a sense of stability and comfort. We would go for long walks in the morning, explore the local parks in the afternoon, and curl up together in the evenings, watching TV or reading. It was a simple life, but it was exactly what I needed. One day, while volunteering at the shelter, I met a man named Ryan. He was kind, patient, and had a deep love for animals. We bonded over our shared passion for rescue dogs, and over time, our friendship grew into something more. I was hesitant at first, afraid of letting someone new into my life after everything that had happened, but Ryan was understanding, never pushing me to move faster than I was comfortable with. He respected my boundaries and supported me in my healing journey. As our relationship grew, I started to open up to him about my past, something I had never been able to do with anyone else. Ryan listened without judgment, offering comfort and understanding when I needed it most. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could truly trust someone, like I could let my guard down and just be myself. Ryan and I eventually moved in together, and he became a second parent to Buzz, who adored him just as much as I did. Our little family brought me a sense of peace and happiness that I had never thought possible. I still had my bad days, but with Ryan and Buzz by my side, I knew I could get through anything. As the years went by, I continued to grow and heal. I graduated with my degree in animal behavior and started working at a local animal sanctuary, helping to rehabilitate abused and neglected animals. It was fulfilling work, and I knew it was where I was meant to be. My relationship with my dad remained distant but cordial. We exchanged letters occasionally, updating each other on our lives. My sister, I learned, had made significant progress in her treatment and was even considering going to college. It was a strange feeling, knowing that she was getting better, but I was glad that she was finally receiving the help she needed. One day, I received a call from my aunt, the one who had gifted me Buzz. She told me that my mom had passed away in the psychiatric hospital. It was a peaceful death, she assured me, but I couldn't help feeling a mix of emotions. My mom had been a complicated figure in my life, someone who had caused me so much pain, but who I also loved deeply. I took some time to process the news, and eventually, Ryan and I made the trip back to my hometown for the funeral. Being back in that town was surreal. So much had changed, and yet so much was the same. Seeing my dad again was difficult, but we shared a quiet understanding of everything that had happened. The funeral was small and simple, and afterward, my dad and I had a long conversation about the past, the present, and the future. It was the first time we had truly talked in years, and it felt like a step toward healing. After the funeral, I returned to my new life with Ryan and Buzz, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. My past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was stronger now, more resilient, and I knew that I could face whatever challenges the future might bring. Life continued on, and over time, I built a life that was full of love, peace, and fulfillment. I had found my place in the world, far away from the chaos of my past. I had a career that I was passionate about, a partner who loved and supported me, and a dog who had been with me through it all. In the end, I learned that healing isn't about forgetting the past or pretending it didn't happen. It's about finding the strength to move forward, to create a life that is meaningful and fulfilling, despite everything that has happened. I'm proud of the person I've become, and I know that I'm finally living the life I deserve. As the years passed, the life I had built with Ryan and Buzz continued to grow richer and more fulfilling. Our little home became a sanctuary, not just for us, but for the many animals we fostered and rehabilitated. The animal sanctuary where I worked flourished under my care, and I eventually became the head of the rehabilitation program. It was a dream come true, one that allowed me to give back in a way that felt deeply personal and meaningful. Ryan and I talked about the future often. We discussed the possibility of starting a family, but we both agreed that we wanted to wait until we felt completely ready. In the meantime, we focused on our work, our relationship, and our shared love for animals. We adopted a few more pets along the way, each one a rescue with its own story of hardship and survival. Our home was filled with the sounds of happy, healthy animals, and it brought us both a deep sense of contentment. One evening, after a long day at the sanctuary, Ryan surprised me with a small box wrapped in a simple ribbon. Inside was a beautiful locket, engraved with the names of all the pets we had loved and lost over the years, including Arlo. I was overwhelmed with emotion as I held the locket in my hand. It was a reminder of how far I had come, how much I had overcome, and how much love I had found despite everything. I know it's been a long journey, Ryan said softly, taking my hand in his. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. We've built something beautiful together, and I can't wait to see what the future holds. Tears welled up in my eyes as I leaned into him, grateful beyond words for his unwavering support and love. It was in that moment that I realized just how much he meant to me, how much we had grown together, and how deeply I wanted to continue building our life as a family. We decided then and there to start trying for a child, feeling that the time was finally right. The next few months were a whirlwind of excitement and anticipation. We prepared our home, talked about baby names, and imagined what our lives would be like as parents. It wasn't long before we received the joyful news. We were expecting. The pregnancy was smooth, and with every ultrasound, our excitement grew. Buzz seemed to sense the change, often resting his head on my growing belly as if to protect the new life inside me. As our due date approached, my thoughts occasionally drifted back to my past, to my sister and my parents. I wondered how they would react if they knew I was about to become a mother. I hadn't heard much from my dad since the funeral, but I knew from my aunt's occasional updates that my sister was doing well. She had completed her treatment and was now living independently, attending college and working part-time. It was strange to think of her as a functioning adult after everything that had happened, but I was glad she was getting her life together. When our daughter was born, it was the most profound moment of my life. Holding her in my arms, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and protectiveness. We named her Grace, a nod to the grace I had found in my own journey, and a wish for the kind of life we hoped to provide for her, a life filled with love, stability, and the kind of family I had always longed for. As Grace grew, our lives settled into a new rhythm. I took some time off from the sanctuary to focus on being a mom, while Ryan continued his work. Our home was full of laughter, the pitter-patter of little feet, and the constant companionship of our furry family members. Grace adored the animals, and they seemed to sense that she was one of their own. Buzz, now a bit older and grayer, was especially protective of her, always by her side. One day, when Grace was about 3 years old, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but the return address caught my eye. It was from the town where my sister was now living. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a letter from my sister, the first communication I had received from her in years. The letter was short and to the point. She wrote that she had heard through our aunt that I had become a mother and that she wanted to congratulate me. She also mentioned that she was sorry for everything that had happened between us, that she had changed, and that she hoped one day we could talk. She included her phone number, inviting me to reach out if and when I felt ready. Reading the letter, I was overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to crumple it up and throw it away, to protect the life I had built from the pain of the past. But another part of me was curious to know who my sister had become, to see if the years of treatment had truly changed her. I knew that this was a decision I couldn't make lightly, especially with Grace in my life now. I didn't want to invite any chaos or negativity into her world. I talked it over with Ryan, who, as always, was supportive of whatever decision I made. He reminded me that I was in control now, that I could set the boundaries I needed to keep myself and our family safe. After much deliberation, I decided to write my sister back. I told her that I was glad to hear she was doing well, but that I needed time before I could consider rebuilding our relationship. I explained that my priority was Grace and that I wasn't ready to bring her into my life just yet. My sister responded with understanding, assuring me that she would respect my boundaries and that she was willing to wait until I was ready. Over the next few years, we exchanged occasional letters, gradually rebuilding a cautious relationship. I kept her at a distance, not wanting to disrupt the peace I had worked so hard to create, but I also found myself healing in ways I hadn't expected. The act of communicating with her, even in such a limited way, helped me to let go of some of the lingering anger and resentment I had held on to for so long. As Grace grew older, I eventually told her about my family, including the difficult parts of my past. I wanted her to understand where I came from and why I had made the choices I did. She was a wise and compassionate child, and she took it all in stride, asking thoughtful questions and offering her own perspective. She even suggested that one day we should visit my sister, to see how she was doing. When Grace turned 7, I felt that the time was finally right. I reached out to my sister and suggested that we meet in a neutral place, just the two of us, to see how things would go. We agreed to meet at a small cafe in the town where she lived. As the day approached, I was filled with anxiety, unsure of how I would feel seeing her again after all these years. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted her immediately. She looked different, older, more mature, with a softness in her expression that I had never seen before. As I approached, she stood up and gave me a tentative smile. We hugged awkwardly, both unsure of how to bridge the gap that had formed between us. We spent the next few hours talking, catching up on each other's lives. She told me about her studies, her work, and the friends she had made. I told her about Grace, about Ryan, and about the life I had built. As we talked, I realized that my sister had truly changed. She wasn't the same person who had caused so much pain in our family. She was remorseful, reflective, and genuinely trying to be a better person. By the end of our meeting, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't known I needed. We agreed to keep in touch and to slowly introduce her into my life with Grace, starting with video calls and then, if things went well, an in-person visit. It was a slow process, but one that allowed us to rebuild trust at our own pace. Over the next few years, my sister became a part of our lives, though in a limited way. Grace was curious about her aunt, and we made sure to approach everything with honesty and transparency. My sister respected our boundaries and never pushed for more than I was comfortable with. Life continued on, and as the years went by, I found myself at peace with my past. My family wasn't perfect, but I had learned to navigate the complexities of our relationships in a way that felt healthy and balanced. I was proud of the life I had built, proud of the mother and partner I had become, and proud of the journey I had taken to get to where I was. In the end, I learned that healing is a lifelong process, one that requires patience, self-compassion, and the courage to face even the darkest parts of our past. But it's also a process that brings incredible rewards: love, peace, and the ability to live a life filled with purpose and joy. I had come a long way from the scared, broken young woman who had once feared her own family. I had found my strength, my voice, and my place in the world. And for that, I was eternally grateful.